Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and Rachel. Rachel is standing in for Matt Lineker today, Rachel Griffiths-Boyce. She is going to be on the chat today. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, everyone.
Rachel was going to make sure that I answer any questions that you have there in the chat. I'll be stopping regularly to hydrate because it is extremely hot here in the UK. And answer any questions. So I encourage you to ask them as we go. Now, today is going to be a webinar. I imagine it much quicker than the one I did on automation a fortnight ago, which was quite a long one. So I've cut the slides down a lot for this session. And we're going to be talking about using audiences in Totara Learn. It's going to be a mix of slides and a live demo. So I may flip over to my local site just to show you what I'm talking about or how to do a particular thing. Do ask questions as we go. If there are any particularly complicated questions, I'm looking at you, Jill, we're going to probably wait till the end to cover those off and use the functionality in Zoom to allow you to speak, because otherwise you're by default muted, and we can nut out those questions or those particular problems together at the end. So don't be afraid to hold on to your questions at the very end if they're particularly complicated, and we can talk them through. So I imagine we'll be going through around 20 minutes today. And just to remind you that this session is being recorded. We will be publishing this on the community in the next day or two. So you can watch again if you so wish, or you can share with your friends and colleagues. Anything to add, Rachel?
No, I don't think so. Sounds good. I'm excited about this one.
Are you?
I love audiences.
So do I. So do I. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Let's get cracking. So, enough of looking at my face. So, for a lot of you, audiences functionality may be something that you're very familiar with. It may be that I'm speaking today to people that are using Totara Learn. Maybe I'm speaking to people that haven't. So, I'm going to go through a little bit of what audiences can do. And then maybe some things that you might not have tried yet with audiences, and maybe a couple of gotchas around audiences, things to look out for. And there's a little surprise section at the end of this session as well for those particularly using Totara Learn as well. I might be excited to see. So the audiences functionality is incredibly powerful. Like Rachel, it is my favorite piece of functionality within the system. Primarily, it's around the benefits of it are around automation, and I did a webinar series on automation that you may want to go back and watch, where I do focus on audiences in some detail. But audiences can be used for a variety of things. So some of the more common ways to use it is around automatically enrolling learners into various courses, programs, and certifications. And optionally limiting the visibility of certain courses, programs, and certifications to certain audiences as well. It can be also used to assign access rights at the system context, so system level roles like site administrator or course creator. And it can be also used to assign access, excuse me, voice suddenly decided to go, assign access to particular learning plan templates, and optionally actually create those learning plans. And on that automation session webinar that I was just talking about, I talk about how you can actually pre-populate those learning plans with various courses and competencies. Now, audience is particularly powerful around automation and bulk update when used alongside HR import. So you can create and update users and then still filter them into the various audiences automatically to make sure that as soon as a user is created or as soon as a user's circumstance change, they're put into the right audiences. Now, audiences also can be used to add a level of personalization across your site. So that might be around assigning dashboard access or navigation items for specific user types or groups. So maybe for managers, for admins, for internal versus external users. And it can also simplify the user experience. So it can limit what an individual sees or doesn't see, so that their experience is very much filtered to only display relevant items to them and to sort of make it a cleaner, faster interface for them. Now, Totara Learn has two different types of audiences. We have set audiences and dynamic audiences. So for those people that haven't tried using audiences or are new to audiences, I'll run through this very quickly. So for set audiences, membership to an audience is manually assigned. So you select an individual, you search for a user, and you add them to the audience. And this is really applicable when you've only got a limited number of individuals, so a handful or maybe under 12, just so you're not there all day selecting users from the list. And it's also for audiences where there's a fairly infrequent change in who might be a member of that audience. So that examples might include, for set audiences, maybe course creators across a site, so you can assign them access rights, or maybe members of a specific project team, where you might want to assign them access to a particular dashboard or enroll them in a particular course. Dynamic audiences, the membership is automated by a set of rules, so rule sets or criteria, which could be very simple or could be quite complex. And they're good for both large or small groups, but groups that have a frequent shift or change in membership. So examples for a dynamic audience might be an audience for all managers or all staff managers across your site, or users within a particular department of your organization, or maybe something more like individuals who are first aid practitioners, so someone who has an active first aid certification. Now, the other thing that audiences can do is, and I touched on this when I was talking about personalization, is that there's a range of display options tied to audience membership. So we can assign one or many dashboards to audiences. If you are assigning or using multiple dashboards, don't forget to include that dashboards block across all of your dashboards so individuals can navigate backwards and forwards between them. You can also tailor which main menu items, so that's the top navigation items, are visible or not visible to certain audiences. And you can even limit the visibility of certain featured links tiles, so particular items within a featured links block based on audience visibility. You can also pre-filter catalog content. So this is using the audience-based visibility functionality, so that users only see a certain group of courses, or put in a different way, don't see certain items within their course catalog. And you can actually mess around a little bit with view permissions and access rights using the audiences functionality. So this is around view permissions, and this is also where I try to do a slick transition between my slides and my local site. How did I do? So what I'm suggesting here around block view permissions is that when you are on your site, and just a reminder that I'm just on a plain old vanilla version 12 site, and all functionality that I'm going to be talking about or have talked about already relates to version 12 of Totara Learn. So here on my front page, I'm going to turn editing on. And if I go into, have a look at this block down the bottom here, this is just a plain old HTML block with an image. And if you go into the edit settings, you've got permissions. And I don't want to look at individuals. I want to, sorry, not check permissions, assign permissions, there we go. I can see who can add a new block and can edit a block settings and who can view the block. And I can actually create a new access right or a new role within the system and assign members of an audience that role in bulk. So what I might do is go into the permissions area, go into define roles, and here is one that I created a couple of days ago. So it's called Audience 1 Access. If I go into that, I have based that off the authenticated user role, but I could equally create one for guest users. And what this would allow me to do is then go into a particular audience, collect a group of users, assign them this access right, and then limit the visibility of that block, or even allow that visibility of that block to certain types of users. So say, for example, we base it off the guest user functionality. What we can do is say, before users log in, before they have created an account, they have quite a different experience within that front page and see different content to when they have actually logged in and maybe enrolled in a particular course. So the content might be more salesy, for example, than excuse me, than people that have already signed up. So you might see more calls to action or introductory courses rather than advanced training or, you know, get started on your next course here. So that's one way of using audiences to assign access rights in bulk. So just to show you exactly where that is under assign roles. I could say everyone in this particular audience has this access right. And then going back to that HTML block into permissions, I could potentially remove access to all of these different types of roles, but provide the audience one access to it, for example. So only they see this role. I'm not going to go and click through all of these. But yeah, for example, you could say only certain user types see this block, or certain user types don't see this block, as an example. Okay.
Meredith, can I interrupt you with a couple of questions we've had already?
Yeah.
Lovely. So Liam asked, can you have a hybrid of audiences? And I think that was related to set or dynamic audiences.
Oh, right. Good question. The answer is no, I'm afraid.
That was an easy one.
Yeah.
And Dan's asking, is it better to base your new role on an archetype or just to have an empty one and just use it as a way to assign rights, for example, for block permissions, reports, etc., to an audience?
It depends on what you're trying to achieve with those block permissions. I think it's probably best to base it on an archetype because you won't have any default capabilities otherwise to therefore then tweak. And on creating roles and using an archetype, always look at curating access rights or using an archetype for a role that might have greater permissions that you want and then remove them, rather than having a lower level of access rights and adding capabilities and permissions. For some reason, 15 years of experiences has shown me that that's a better, a better approach.
Lovely. And we've just had another question from Robin, who asks, what are best practices around managing large numbers of audiences?
Another excellent question. Well, the first thing is to not have too many administrators so it doesn't get completely out of control in terms of creating audiences. The other thing I would say is, well, two tips, I guess. One is when you create an audience, particularly if you have a lot of administrators, is to always use the description field to describe what the audience is for. You might find that there's actually quite a lot of double up in terms of, you know, who's in that audience or what the purpose of that audience is. So use the description. And the second thing is to maybe, rather than, like, let's say you want a group of all your learners and all your managers, you might try and create a really complex set of rules for, you know, everyone that has staff, and then learners would be, you know, everyone who's enrolled in these courses or have the access rights. Don't forget that you've got the Boolean option of saying not in a particular audience. So you can say everyone who's a manager has staff, for example, that's one audience. And then you can create an audience which is everyone not in that manager audience. So you can, if you've got a lot of these groups to make, be as lazy as possible when you create these audiences and leverage off the work that you've already done to filter out users and just flip that around.
Lovely. A couple more. We've got one from Melanie, who I think joined us a little bit late. She said, could an audience be used to assign a role? So, for example, limiting the seminar manager role to a specific group.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so the answer to that's yes. And Roger's actually just provided a bit more context to the question about hybrid audiences, which was that you could have a dynamic audience with membership based on membership of another audience. So, yes. For example, you could have a set audience and then say that membership of your dynamic audience was based on membership of that set audience.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, good clarification. Yes, you can. So one of the audience rules is a member of another audience.
yeah, which sounds really funny when you start to think about it, and then you realize it's actually super useful.
It is super useful, yeah.
Yeah, and then we've just got another one from Dan, which is it better to have one monolithic audience with all of the rules to select staff, or many modular audiences which each select a section of users and then one to bring them all together? i.e. is a member of X audience, and list them all?
I guess it's probably whatever you prefer. Personally, I would probably have lots of small audiences, because if you ever want to make a tweak, it's not so complex. Just to go into one item and remove it. And if you need to update one small group, it's not going to affect so many people if you're not updating one big monolithic audience and having to process all of that.
Lovely. Do you want a couple more?
Yes,
there's many questions. So Karen's asked, can you upload a list of users to form a set audience?
Not really. You'd be, if you were going to upload a group of users and you wanted to automatically put them into an audience, I would use a dynamic audience and maybe have a custom field which identifies them as a member of that audience.
Great. And then Dan just followed up to say, is there much difference performance-wise for a lot of users?
There can be. We're talking lots and lots and lots of users though. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, fantastic. I think that's it for now.
Right, thanks Rachel. Thanks for stopping me. I was totally in the flow there. Okay, well, I mean, as it happens, some of the other bits and pieces of your questions have been total spoilers for some of my slides. So thanks very much, everyone, for anticipating it. Okay, so some of the other things, I should just double check I finished. Oh yeah. So some of the other things you can do with audiences is within the reporting tool, there's a tab called content, and you can filter the content of the report that you've created based on various criteria. And that is things like whether it's the individual's direct reports or indirect reports, positional hierarchy, organizational hierarchy. And in version 12, we added one around audience, which is really neat because you can say everyone who is or is not part of a particular audience are included in this report. And one really interesting way of applying that piece of functionality is actually creating an audience for active users. So we have, individuals that may be suspended or inactive because maybe they're on maternity leave or, on study leave or for some other extended leave, they've been set to a suspended status. You might not want to include those in reports, particularly around certifications and compliance, because that skews the results to show that you've got some people that aren't compliant when they're not even in, on the factory floor or in the office. So you can use a report for active users, which is really helpful. For filtering that content in reports. The other thing to do is when you create a report, you can also schedule that report to be sent to particular audience members. Now, there is a little gotcha on that scheduled report. If you are sending a scheduled report to other people, those content filters that you apply won't be filtered. They won't. They won't apply to the emailed report. What you see when you view the report is what others will receive when sending a scheduled report. So be aware when you use that scheduled report, it will show all content as you would see it. So I talked about Boolean options. So whenever you create an audience, do click around the different options. It's not just has a first name equals Meredith. It could be has a name of everything except for Meredith, or doesn't contain the word Meredith, or does contain the doesn't go in there. So you've got lots of options, so play around with them, and it means that every audience rule kind of has a lot of sub rules within it, and there could be things that you might not have thought of using, so do have a click around. There is a really great help page on audiences, and we've gone through all the different rules. Rachel might be able to find a link and post it in the chat there to talk about how some of those rules might be applied across your Totara Learn site. Now, of course, with audiences, there's another piece of functionality that it provides, which is access restrictions to activities and resources within a course context. So you can create content within a particular course and restrict or allow access to those items based on their audience membership. And again, you've got some interesting applications for that. So you might want to look at using language or country or organization and provide different content to different groups or types of users within a single course. So another interesting way of using audiences is around self-selection. So you can create custom user fields within your site. Let's flick over here. Under users, you've got some user profile fields, and you can create your own user profile fields. These are all very basic checkbox items, but you can have multiple select and drop-down options as well. And users, not just administrators, but users can go into their profile and they can change those options if you so allow it. So under here, I can make various ticks, and I can create an audience based on custom user profile fields. So if I was, for example, which I am, very much a dedicated member of the Honey Badger fan club, I could therefore be automatically enrolled in a course all about honey badgers, or a dashboard for other fans of honey badgers. But it can be beyond these kind of social type courses. The more information an individual provides within the system, and the more information they put into their profile, the things that you can do extend. So you can provide better course recommendations. You can enroll users in very targeted learning. You can provide quite dedicated dashboards where they're only going to see information that's relevant to them. So encouraging users to complete these user fields will only really benefit you and them in terms of providing them the most relevant learning at the right time. So I do encourage you to use these. I want to show you a couple of other things around audiences, some other rules that you may not have realized were there. So in this audience I created before called Other Criteria, one of the options is around, it's called course enrollment or course completion duration. And what this allows you to do is identify users that have completed or not completed courses or a course in a certain period of time. So it could show that this user has completed this list of courses. So these 3 courses in 12 days, they have smashed through those courses. And that might be a trigger for you to maybe enroll them in, let's say, an advanced course or the management program. And likewise, you can flip that on the head. If they've been enrolled in one course and it took them 30 days, maybe that's a flag for you to contact that individual and see why they're struggling, see why they're not engaged, and take some action across that. Some other options is to create an audience based on language preference, so that if you have a multilingual site, you can, with your audiences, pre-filter the course catalogue based on an individual's preferred language. So if you've got courses in both English and French, an individual has been added to the French audience, and you've applied visibility to French courses to the catalogue, they'll only see those courses that have been completed or available in French. Or any other language, or a combination of languages. Another interesting way is to create an audience based on authentication type. And this is where is it? Here we go. This is a relatively new addition. And this is a really neat tool as well, because this allows you to create audiences perhaps based on the way that the individual's account was created, or has been, or is how they log in. So this really very much applies to an extended enterprise option, where you might have identify users that are maybe external users because they've registered their own account, or an account's been created for them manually by an administrator, versus an authentication maybe through single sign-on or shared authentication for your internal users, and being able to automate the audience membership based on how an account was created. And that might be a clear identifier for this extended enterprise model. Before I go into the last one, because I'm going to flip screens again, any questions?
Yeah, we've just got one more, which was, can you use appraisal completion as an audience rule? I was just quickly skimming the docs and I couldn't see it.
No, I don't. No, that's not a current rule. But interesting idea. Very interesting idea. We'll take note of that one. We'll talk to the product manager after this.
And Melanie's just asking us about whether we'll be able to get the recording. And yeah, all of the webinars are recorded and put up on the Totara community. So this one should be up in the next day or 2 after today's session.
Okay. Now, that's right. The last little idea I've got here is around course recommendations. Now, one way you can do this is within a course environment. You can use the access restrictions. What did I go into just there earlier to show someone? Emerging staff development? No, it was not that course. Anyway, what you can do within a particular course, I remember what one it was. I put my special code to remember it. So what you can do here is if you create a particular course and an individual you might want to recommend that they complete another course afterwards. One approach is to use the access restrictions within a course and present a label, so the individual can, once they've completed maybe the final certificate or the final assessment, they can then see the label saying, you know, congratulations, you might want to move on to XYZ course. But another way of doing that is using the featured links block and audiences combined. So you see that this particular tile is hidden. It's saying, looking for your next course, how about enrolling in logistical planning? And this has been set as an audience-based visibility item. And the audience is called, just so we all know, a course recommendation for logistical planning. So only people that are a part of this particular audience can see this particular tile within this featured links block here on the front page. If I go into the audiences, we can see there I've got this course recommendation. And looking at the rules, we can see that the user has completed any of these courses. So any individuals that have completed these 3 courses that you can see on screen here, mentoring and supervising, leadership and influence, design thinking for business innovation, but has not completed the logistical planning course yet, will see this tile presented to them. So when they log in, the system goes, great, you've completed all these courses. Naturally, I think the next course will be for you. Now, there is one small drawback with this, which I'll flag, which is if the individual is partway through logistical planning, it will still provide them this recommendation. So to kind of mitigate that confusion, what I suggest is putting the progress bar on that particular featured links tile, so that an individual can see that they can make the leap that they've started at and they're 50 way through. So the system is still recommend they complete logistical planning versus just enroll in it. So that's one way of processing or applying course recommendations or even program recommendations using the featured links tiles. Any questions?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute again. We're all good, thanks.
Okay, good. There's a dramatic pause. Okay. So there's a couple of audience gotchas. So one of the things is that we have both category level and system level audiences. I haven't really used category level audiences in a way, but what it allows you to do is create an audience where all of the functionality that we've described is applicable at the category context. So they apply within the courses within that category. Now I say it's a gotcha because sometimes you can accidentally create an audience in the category area versus the system area, and then you can't find it. So if you're absolutely certain that you've created an audience but can't find it, check it's not hiding under the category area, because it is easy to accidentally create it in the wrong context. The second gotcha is around the automatic update of dynamic audiences. You can set an audience to not automatically update if you don't want. So you can create the audience, everyone's enrolled in it, but you can say that once everyone's enrolled in it, people can't be added or people can't be removed. So you do have some options. If you decide to remove people, if they no longer belong to a particular dynamic audience, do remember that that individual is suddenly going to have quite a different learning experience. So if it's completely automated and they aren't going to be expected to be, suddenly see not see a course that previously they could see, maybe it's worth putting that on your FAQs or including that in your training just to let people know that this is a possibility. The next thing is when creating a dynamic audience. So we saw it briefly on screen here. It's kind of a complicated interface because of the level of complexity that you can offer. So you have, because you've got these rule sets, which are clusters of rules, and you can have multiple roles to kind of say, you know, everyone who's X plus everyone who's Y, but not everyone who's Z kind of thing. You've got and or dividers within rules. So you can see this is an and divider. There's and here and here. And you can have dividers between sets. And this is the option for between sets. So if I was to add another rule, it would mean that it would be any user that has completed the courses that you see here, but not this course, and any of the other conditions that I might add. So they might say, and they're based in Brighton, which is going to restrict that view. The other option is you could say or here between the sets, and if your next option is around city, you could say everyone has completed those courses or is based in Brighton, for example, or no, not in Brighton, as we know. Next gotcha is around audience-based visibility. That's not on by default. That is something that needs to be switched on your site. It's under the advanced settings within your administration menu. So that's a very minor gotcha, but if you're looking for it and it's not there, that's why you need to enable it. And the other thing is that because of the amount of processing power and the complexity of some of the audiences you might create, the system doesn't magically and instantly update audiences. It's what's called a scheduled task. So it runs on a periodic basis. Now every site is set up slightly different. It could be run every minute if you've only got a few users. For people that have a lot of users and a lot of audiences, maybe it's run every hour, whatever is going to be best for performance and that learner experience. So if you do make changes to audiences, be aware that the end user isn't going to instantly see a change, most likely. So if a user, for example, changes their preferred language from French to Dutch, they're not going to immediately see a different course catalogue. So it's really about kind of managing expectations of the end user, but also timing any of your audience changes. So if you're going to make a bunch of changes, you know, do it first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening, so the individuals that it will affect won't even notice. Now, any questions, Rachel?
Yeah, we've just had one, which was Tony asking, can you show an example of a category audience setting it up or finding it?
Yes, I can do that. So it's exactly the same. It's just a little different tab here. So these are system audiences. All audiences are listed here. When you create a new audience, it's just a matter of either saying system, which is the default, or choosing the particular category. And then otherwise, it's exactly the same.
Lovely, that's all we've got at the moment, I think.
Okay, cool. Alrighty, I did kind of big it up, but I do have another slide for those people. Now, we are not too far off releasing version 13 of Totara Learn. And included in those changes, and in fact, they're already available now through the Evergreen release, and you can read a little bit more about them in the What's New section of the help documentation, which talks about the Evergreen release, is that we have a range of new audience rules that will be available across Totara Learn. So I wanted to go through these very quickly, and this might be exciting to some folks, it may not to others. So one of the options has indirect reports, so people who are a manager. Another one is the number of direct reports. So we have direct reports now, but that's been upgraded a little bit, so you can specify how many direct reports. So someone who's managing two staff might have a very different kind of group of training that they need to complete if they have 50 staff, although that would be pretty shocking for that individual. You know, small groups or large groups might have different training requirements. Has appraisees is another new rule, is a temporary manager, and the multi-select organization type custom field. Now this is very specific. I'll try to describe this quickly. So when you're creating an organizational hierarchy, you can create different types of hierarchy. And when you create a different type, which might identify, you know, region or building or, you know, subunit or whatever, when you create types, you can also add custom fields to those types to capture even more information. And one of those field types is the multi-select option, a bit like the checkbox. And And that can also now be an audience role. So someone that is part of an organization that has a particular piece of information attached to them via this custom field. We also have the user account creation date. So you can identify people that are maybe long-time users, as well as people that have just signed up or just had an account created for them and enrolling them in different courses or awarding them different rewards. Historic course completion and historic course completion date. And this is a way to account for the certifications functionality, so that when your completion is archived, when you go to recertify, the system of course remembers that, but we can now base an audience role based on that archived or historic completion. We have course enrollment, so someone who's enrolled in a particular course, and this is something that will mean that that course recommendations hack that I've suggested around the featured links block, I would replace as has not completed with has not enrolled in a particular course. So where this can be applied to a range of things, including better recommendations via the featured links blocks. Program assignment, same thing, and job assignment ID, which for some of you might be exciting if you have everything coming through from HR import and it's restricted to ID numbers versus titles, which may be repetitive. So there might be lots of different content creators, for example, but there might be a unique ID to identify people that create content on health versus education versus pharmacy, for example. So those are coming in 13. So hopefully that little sneak peek has whet your appetite for the upcoming release. Any questions, Rachel?
No, I think we're good.
Excellent. So as always, pretty much everything that I've talked about today, you can learn through the help documentation or through the range of Academy courses. We'll cover this. And if you have any questions or anything else that you'd like to know, please do jump into the community forums and do ask your questions. We are keeping an eye on them, and there are a number of people in the community that do jump in and like to help. So we encourage you to hit the community on a regular basis and check out those forums. Anything else popping up?
Yeah, we've got a couple of things. So Roger says, auto-enrollment via audiences does not seem to take effect until the audience member tries to open the course. They get a message saying you've been enrolled on XX course. Is it possible to avoid this and have the learner enrolled purely by dint of their audience membership? It has an effect on audience visibility.
I would double check that you have the audience sync enrollment plugin enabled at the site level and enabled at the course level. That should mean that it's a seamless experience for the individual. Sometimes it's not there by default, and what that allows you to do is, yeah, have that hopefully that seamless experience.
Lovely. And another question we've got is, can I use audiences in replacement of tenancy?
Wow, kind of. So you can, it's not so much of a, well, the short answer is yes, there to some extent. So you can divide users into different kind of tenant type groups using the audiences, so external, internal, or different organizations, and you can give them quite a different experience in terms of, you know, the dashboards and the navigation and the catalog. But what you can't do is do things like disseminate user administration for those and those groups. And that is actually something that's also coming in Totara 13, is some dedicated tenant management system functionality, which Rachel knows all about, which will allow you to say, all right, you've got this particular tenant, you know, Rachel is going to be the administrator for that tenant, so she can create new users and she can update users. So yes, to an extent. There are 2 blog posts on our site which talks about using audiences for multi-tenancy and the different functionality that you can tap in to provide that kind of veneer of multi-tenancy across your Learn site. One is the functionality, and the 2 is a pun-riddled scenario that might help solidify what I'm trying to identify. We can post that in the chat in a moment if you stick around. It's probably a bit of a hard one to find for Rachel because it goes back a few years. So yeah, the short answer is yes, kind of.
I found the pun-laden scenario already. You'll be pleased
Okay,
to know.
good on you. Yeah. Hopefully there's a link on that page to the first post, but yeah, it shouldn't be much. Yeah, if you found that one, I should just keep scrolling and be able to find the other one.
Yeah, there we go. I've posted both of those two in the chat now.
Thanks, Rachel.
Lovely. I can't see any other questions coming through, and you obviously post in there, guys, if you have got anything. Dan provided some clarification to Roger's question about the delay in enrolment, saying that he thinks that might be when they're enrolled via a program and the program membership is via audience.
Oh, I see.
And if you're enrolled directly by audience, then they should be pre-enrolled already.
Good shout, Danny.
That's something I've come across too.
Yeah, that's a very good shout.
Yeah, thanks for that. Nothing else coming in. You've answered everybody's questions.
Wonderful. What a wonderful engaged group asking such great questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time and thought into this. Right, well, I think it's time for another cold drink. I hope everyone is happy and healthy, and appreciate your time, and thank you for joining. Thank you very much, Rachel, for being the chat host